From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. If you have any questions you'd like to ask or advice you'd like to give, come on over to podtherapy.net and join our conversation. We have a great show today. We will talk about some new research on what women find attractive about men. We'll answer some listener mail, and we'll talk about some of our favorite foods. Mine is salt pork. And now, broadcasting from Level 9 Studios, that guy is Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
Salt pork? Is that like the pork rinds? Is that salty pork? Is like a snack?
I'll be honest, I don't really know.
Oh, okay. But you like it?
It's an inside joke to a few listeners out there.
Oh, all right. Yeah. So that was exciting. As soon as I heard that, I'm like, huh, okay. I've heard of salt pork. It's a delicacy. All right. Well, yes. So welcome back, listeners. And we are so thankful. You probably heard in the opening, we are in Level 9 Studios, right where we belong, Nick. It feels good to be home.
Which is why it sounds professional. And
now it sounds good again.
Not thrown together with some stuff we bought at Best Buy.
Yeah, thank you, Best Buy, for sponsoring our makeshift Level 10 studios. Scott has brought us back, okay? He unlocked the door this time. He let us back in. And we're very grateful. And you know what? We're going to mind our manners. You know, Nick's wearing a shirt this time. It's good. Yeah. There's some new signs in the studio. No shirt, no shoes, no podcast.
We will behave.
We will now behave. We definitely want to leave here again. But super excited for it. So, Nick, we do have some new research, some really interesting stuff. Yeah, it actually is. So, new research that tells us about women and what they are attracted to, and most importantly, when they are attracted to it. So here's what came out hot off the press, okay? So you might remember this from grad school too. There's this established study that's been out there for a long time, which gave us this thing called the good genes ovulatory shift hypothesis.
Of course, yeah, everybody knows about
this, yeah.
About the good,
or GGOSH for short, the good genes ovulatory shift hypothesis. So here's what GGOSH essentially has said over the last about 10 years. GGOSH essentially said that when women are fertile versus luteal in their ovulatory cycle, they are they're horny. Just come right out with it. They're very horny, and so they're more sexually attracted to males during that part of the cycle. Okay. But one of the things that the GGOSH hypothesis kind of threw out there was, and also, not only are they horny, but they are attracted to what we would consider dominant male traits.
Right.
So maybe some facial hair, aggression, confidence, strong eye contact, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so the GGOSH study had multiple different studies that kind of supported that hypothesis, seemed to be, in the bank, the check was cashed, it's cleared, everything's good. But then the research world was turned upside down when Dr. Julia Younger, which is spelled Junger, she has one of those like Swedish U's with like dots over it or something. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
So Junger or something. I don't know, whatever. So Julia, she put up a new study, and basically here's what she did. Okay, she had hundreds of women. And she monitored their ovulation cycle, and she had them watch video clips of varieties of men interacting with women. Now, in the videos, you couldn't see the women. You could only see the men. And so they'd watch these actors, that are interacting with women in the videos. And the men had all sorts of different personalities, different styles. It ranged from more dominant to less so. And the guys had every possible body type. Okay, so we're talking hundreds of women, lots and lots of film over the course of months, okay? Then the women would rank their sexual interest in the actors after watching the videos. And she would keep track of where they're at in their ovulatory cycle. And on top of that, she did something nobody's ever done before, which is that she periodically took saliva samples from them so that she could figure out where's their actual hormone levels and what's up and what's down, which was a new factor that we've never actually had before. So she runs this study, and then she publishes the results. And the published results turn GGOSH on its head. So here are the results. The first thing is, yes, women are definitely hornier during the fertile part of their cycle. So that did confirm. Okay, so she did confirm that aspect of GGOSH. That's true. It's in the bank. We know that that's true. And it makes evolutionary sense, right? Your body is responsive when you are most likely to conceive. So, that actually makes sense. But on top of that, she added another chapter to this. Because she did that saliva study, she discovered precisely which hormone it is that is escalated when women have a higher sex drive, and it's called estriadol. So the female hormone estriadol seems to be correlated with higher sex drive among women. So if you're out there and you're like, man, I really want to create a new cologne brand, you figure out how to distill that stuff. Bathe in it. Apparently it will have an effect, which I'm not sure if they can just smell it, but pretty sure it has to be at hormone. So anyway, that was the first takeaway of our study. So it confirmed that aspect of Gigosh, and it taught us about estriadol. But here's the next thing. The next thing that she discovered is the women had no correlation with attraction to certain traits. So the women were not attracted to more dominant traits. There was no definable difference. And that turned Gigosh on its head because, again, Gigosh stands for good genes ovulatory shift hypothesis. So we knew about the ovulatory aspect of it, that women are more attracted when they're fertile. That's fine. But the good genes part was about dominance. And so the original studies had said, oh, well, men who have dominant traits probably are exhibiting the kinds of genes that women would ultimately select for.
So when you talk about dominant traits, we're talking about like kind of that square jawline.
Yes, physical traits like the square jawline or facial hair, things like that, but really personality traits. It had more to do with behavior. And so like confidence, eye contact, their stance. And that was a big part of the video analog too, was that the actors in the videos were intentionally trying to portray certain aspects of male behavior. And so there were times whenever they would lean in and be aggressive, open posture, swagger, things like that, versus not that, high voice, low voice, baritone, soprano, it didn't matter. But what's fascinating is Gigosh had for a long time had us believing that these women, when they are sexually attracted, are selecting for dominant male characteristics. But this study by Younger shows us, no, they're not. They don't care. They just want the man.
That's okay. So that's really interesting because I'm already a couple steps ahead of you. Because what I'm thinking, because now I'm thinking like, how does this impact dating?
Oh, it's huge.
Because when you're dating and you're getting dating advice, one of the things that people will say all the time is the importance of not necessarily assertiveness, but confidence. Yeah. Confidence is huge. So confidence being one of those traits, and the things that you're talking about as far as kind of that open posture, standing up tall, standing up straight, presenting yourself, and so now you're saying that there's no actual correlation with it.
Well, so let me unpack that. There is probably evidence out there which tells us that there's a trend where women tend to select for certain characteristics like confidence. That could be a thing. It could just be considered a male factor that they are mostly attracted to. But what this study shows us is they're at least not subconsciously attracted to confidence. If they like confidence, it's because they like that aspect of you. The same way that one woman will say, oh, I really like a guy with a sense of humor. Okay, Darwin is not responsible for that. Like evolution did not program her to want a guy with a sense of humor. She is personally attracted to that type of man. So if they are attracted to men with confidence, fine. And it might be the case that a lot of women are, fine. But what this study unpacks for us is that it is not programmed. It is not genetic. It is not evolutionary. And we believed that it was. And so not only is that huge. So the two biggest takeaways were, A, they confirmed, yes, women are much more sexually hungry during their fertility cycle on the ovulation. But the big takeaway was they're not necessarily more attracted to dominant men or dominant features or dominant behavior. That's not anything. It doesn't matter. It had a zero effect. But then there was one last takeaway that came out of the study, and this was fascinating. So single women were actually less horny during that fertility piece of the cycle than were partnered women. Isn't that interesting? Because you probably would assume it'd be the other way around.
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
I don't know. I guess it kind of makes sense because if like from an evolutionary perspective, you would think that if you are already paired up, then that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's funny is, as you just said that, in the study, the author offers that possible explanation. And says, well, Dr. Younger says exactly what you just said. She said, well, from the evolutionary hypothesis, we're saying, okay, she's already partnered, and so they've achieved that higher level of safety. And if you've achieved that sense of safety, like somebody's going to be there to take care of you for 9 months while you're gestating, that you probably are more accelerated. You're ready to go. Like the factors are in line. The stars are correct for you to go ahead and proceed with a pregnancy. So your body would probably be even more motivated to conceive because you have that aspect.
Wow.
Yeah, because I mean, you think about it. Like single women are not walking around saying, "Boy, you know, sure would like to get pregnant today." Like oftentimes, it's exactly the opposite of what they're looking for right now. Exactly. Whereas when they're partnered in a stable relationship, now this is on their mind. Like now they're thinking about it a lot more, and they start to develop the maternal instincts. We're actually seeing hormonal changes before pregnancy that indicate pregnancy, which is fascinating because and that's a whole nother study. But so yeah, that's actually a really good point. So yeah, 3 huge takeaways from a brand new, groundbreaking study that tells us about what women are attracted to on a default level before we factor in their personal tastes. And fellas, if you're out there and you're like, man, you know, I don't look like the quarterback of the football team, you know, I'm not the jock, I'm not the... What we're seeing in this data is that that's not the default, man.
Kind of levels the playing field a little bit, doesn't it?
Hell yeah, it does. Hell yeah. Nerds around the world rejoice. It's going to be okay, dude.
We got a chance.
Shine them shoes, baby. Get out there. You have a chance. All these nerds was like, yes. Now they're going to, I can just hear like,
that's cool.
The Saturday Night Fever soundtracks playing and like they're like putting on their white jacket, like strutting down the street. Dun, 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 dun. I got this now. Science is on my side.
Now, not that I want to
rain on their parade,
be, you know, Johnny Buzzkill, but
you love being Johnny Buzzkill.
I kind of do.
Yeah, that's pretty much your thing.
Yeah. I love it when people get excited about something and be like, but
is it that great?
Here's the other thing, though.
They cured cancer.
Nah. But here's the other thing, though, too, with this is that obviously this study really only looks at women during a certain portion of their cycle. Right? Not the whole thing.
No, it does.
Oh, it did.
So okay. What's happening is they're monitoring them all month long. And they're monitoring when their cycle is happening, right? Which you can predict. Like, my wife has like an app, like tells her, hey, you're fertile, stay away from that guy. like an alarm comes on.
I can't wait to send her a text later and say, guess what we talked about on the show?
Yeah. Jim's talking about whether or not you're fertile. It's getting weird.
You're going to want to get down here.
Yeah, it's getting really weird. No, but that's a thing. And there's female listeners right now that are nodding their heads going, no, that is a really good app, though. You should totally have that. Because it gives you like a notification. It's like, hey, just so you know, like, this is the deal. Like, over the next 72 hours, you should just be aware that, you know, whatever. But, you know, so no, the study actually watched them for the whole month. It saw, you know, the ups and downs of the cycle. And when they were predicted to be very fertile, which you can predict with a good amount of accuracy, because, and you know, I don't know if you know this, Nick, because you're not a woman, and I've never been either.
It's true.
But I am affiliated with them. Apparently, women can feel this. They know when they are ovulating. It's like a hurt. Like they can feel it, and so they know, like, oh, there it is. Like, I can feel this happening. I'm fertile now, and like that's super creepy. Like, I don't know what to make of that, but like, at least they know. Like, that's a good thing. They have an internal alarm clock. So they're aware. And so it's really interesting anyway. So the study tells us that dominant traits are not necessarily selected for. Men everywhere rejoice. You don't have to fit a stereotype to be the sexual monster that you think you're supposed to be. That Hollywoodized version of the sexual ideal man might be fun for fiction, and it's possibly true that a plurality of women happen to like that. You know, that's possible. But at least we know it's not programmed, and at least we know we're not seeing this evolve out of them naturally. So, men of the world rejoice. Nerds, great news for you, baby. You can do this. You got to work on that personality, though.
So this is going
to happen.
This is some interesting research.
Yeah, groundbreaking stuff. It's an opportunity.
I mean, I think there's enough anecdotal evidence to support a lot of the other things that's out there as far as, you know, dating and how to present yourself as being attractive. Because I honestly feel like the confidence thing is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's enough evidence out there to support that, even if it's not really justified in this research, but there's something to it.
Well, look at it this way, too. These women didn't interact with the actors, right? They watched them on a video.
Right.
And then they were just asked superficially. Like, if we followed the study and said, will you actually go out with this man? Most of the women probably like, no, I didn't even meet him. Like, I saw him on a video. I don't care. Like, you're just asking me in a survey-like fashion, how attractive was that guy? 1 through 5. You know, I don't know. He's a 4. Like, there's no correlation to it. Like, it doesn't bear out. But what you're saying is still true, though. Like, there are male attributes or personality attributes that are just attractive. And like, look at the aspect of confidence. That's not just attractive for women to see in a male that they might consider as a partner. It's attractive for men to see in another man.
Yeah.
It's a human condition. Like, we like confident people. We like confident people so much, we're willing to give them absolute power, even if they are demonstrably a bad thing. Like that, human history is riddled with that. Like really bad dictators. Like Napoleon escaped that island and like walked back to Versailles and like became a dictator again because they were like, look at his strut. Like those edges are creased. That dude is wearing that uniform. Hell yeah. Like, you know, just get behind him. Like, let's just do it.
As an example, I have believed a lot of the stuff that you've said only because you said it confidently.
Nick, I don't believe 99% of what I say. If you say something, but there's an old joke about that, right? That it's the old JFK thing. You know, JFK got up in front of, you know, Berlin and he gave that big speech and, you know, he's talking about the wall and stuff. And he gets up there and he says, "Et bin ein Berliner," and they freak out, you know, and like people are like, what did he say? And like it translates to, "I'm a donut."
Like, are you sure? I thought that was a joke.
No, it really did.
Oh.
So a Berliner in Berlin is a donut. The same as hamburger is the name of a city.
Right.
But it's
hamburger.
a hamburger, like, you know, or a Frankfurter is the name of a city. It's food. And so a Berliner isn't a person from Berlin. It's a donut that comes from Berlin. And he was speaking to the people of Berlin, and he said, "I'm a donut." And they freaked the hell out. Because I've seen a study on this. It's like 10% what you said, 90% how you said it. And you get up there, you JFK that audience, you're going to make it. So if you're out there today and you're wondering, does swagger still count? Still counts, fella. But you don't necessarily have to default to that. You're going to be okay.
Excellent. Well, actually, and this would improve most people's confidence having this research.
Yeah,
so
at least you know the deck's not stacked against you. Be yourself. It's going to work out.
Yeah. You're welcome, America.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are taking your questions. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
Welcome back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and we're in our advice segment. This first question is about pornography. Okay.
Aren't they always about pornography, Nick?
On this show, it seems to be.
Yeah, we've really degraded ourselves. This whole episode's about sex. That just clicked for me. Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
the whole thing's sexual.
The next one is too.
Oh, there you go.
So,
it's for all the miscreants out there. You're welcome, you bunch of degenerates.
All right. So if you don't like sex, earmuffs.
Earmuffs. Yeah, this will be marked explicit today.
All right. So our first listener writes in, is it okay to watch porn in a relationship? Okay, so I was in a relationship with an older guy for 8 years. From the beginning, he said porn was a huge no when you're in a relationship unless you watch it together, so no masturbating. We broke up in October and I met a new guy and we've been dating ever since. I discovered last night that he watches porn and he commented that he masturbates every once in a while. He asked me before if I ever did stuff, and I said no, because I thought when you're with someone, you don't do those things. I Googled it and saw mixed opinions on it, and I didn't say anything to him because I didn't want to make him feel bad. So is porn and masturbating okay in a relationship or not?
Yeah, I've actually seen this question a lot, and I think that there's lots of different opinions on it. So Nick, I'm interested in how you're going to unpack that. I'll tell you my first reaction. I'm, as a therapist, never quite comfortable with being a referee and like telling you, yeah, no, that's great, everybody should do it, or no, nobody should do it, it's a sin against the Lord. Like, I don't take those opinions very often. My first blush is usually in that first relationship, your partner communicated to you that he didn't feel very comfortable with that and that this felt like an outside thing to him. And so you conform to that standard. In this new relationship, your partner's communicating he has no problem with it. He thinks it's healthy. So I don't know that you can bring that old relationship standards into the new relationship and impose those on your mate. So maybe be open-minded and be adaptable. And that's my first impression of that, but...
Okay, well, and I mean, mine, when the question is porn okay in a relationship? My question back is which relationship? Because every relationship is going to be different. There's no right or wrong answer to that, in my opinion. I think that's something that everybody needs to kind of figure out. Is something a problem? Well, it's a problem when it causes problems. right? So, when we do a mental health diagnosis using the DSM-5, one criteria that everything has to meet is it has to be maladaptive. It has to cause a problem. If it doesn't cause a problem, then there's no diagnosis for it. A great case in point would be OCD, right? I think I've talked about it on the show before, how everybody says, oh, I'm so OCD because because I like to have the volume on my TV set in intervals of 5.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not OCD.
I do the dishes after I eat on them.
Right.
I must have a real problem.
Right. I'm so OCD. It's one of those things where it has become it's thrown around a lot. A lot of people say it, but it's kind of lost its meaning. To truly have OCD, it's impacting your life. Now, if you can't leave and go to work because the TV volume isn't set appropriately, now we're crossing a threshold into maladaptive, and this becomes a diagnosable issue. Not that we're really going to diagnose something like, the use of porn, unless it meets criteria for addiction.
Yeah, the bigger point I think you're making is when you're asking a therapist, is this right or wrong, the fundamental way that we think about problems is we look for the result, right? We say, and the phrase I think in the DSM-5, which if you're uninitiated, the DSM-5 is kind of like our handbook, and it comes out every 20 years. They sort of revise it. And the DSM-5 kind of gives us the criteria and says, hey, depression looks like this. It needs to have these 7 little, check marks next to it. If you see all 7, then you can call it depression or whatever. So one of the check marks on literally every single diagnosis is, does this cause and here's the quote, clinically significant amount of distress?
Right.
So that key phrase, clinically significant distress, is when Nick and I evaluate your life and we try to figure out, is this problem running into other stuff? If it's running other cars off the road and hitting pedestrians and causing problems, yeah, it's a diagnosable thing. We're going to call this a problem. But what I hear you saying, Nick, is your first reaction to this is when you're asking me, is porn okay? Well, is it causing anything negative? It doesn't sound like it's causing anything negative in this next one. You're unsure how to feel about it. Mm-hmm. So the real question is not whether it's okay. The real question is, what is your opinion of it? Does it make you personally feel uncomfortable? And if it does, as a therapist, I'm going to be curious about that. Well, why does it? Is there an insecurity factor to this? Is there something about seeing your mate attracted to somebody else that is not particularly empowering for you or whatever? I've also seen, Nick, here's another way to slant this. I've had this question before from a question of health orthodoxy, where they'll say, hey, is porn healthy? And okay, that's a reframe of the same question.
That's a different question.
Okay, go with that.
I would say. Well, I mean, I'll let you finish your point here, but I guess immediately, to me, that seems like a different question because that's addressing, can this cause a problem for an individual, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a such thing as porn addiction, right? I mean, then I would say yes, then that definitely is a problem. So it's kind of like sometimes I think when there are couples that are talking about this and they're asking a therapist, he says there's nothing wrong with it. I say it's a problem. What do you think, therapist?
Right.
I think what they're really getting at is which one of us is right?
Yeah, they want to ref. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the thing is and again, back to this idea of is pornography healthy? Here's kind of my verdict on it. It's very similar to if you ask me, is wine healthy, right? So, okay, wine can be abused. It can be something that you become dependent on. It can be something that causes a distraction in your life. Is porn doing that? If porn's doing that in your relationship, then I would advise against it. I would advise that we come up with a new way, for you to have a relationship. If porn is a marital aid, or if porn is something that you don't mind your partner participating in because you see it as harmless and you're grateful that, when they're sexually piqued, they're not out there exploring the world, but they're sort of doing this on their own privately, it hurts nobody, fine. But if that causes a distraction to that person, because this is a real point, and I want to bring this back. It is true that there is something called porn addiction, and there is a reality, and this is something that, I want to educate the audience on. The number one group of individuals that I now see with erectile dysfunction is not men that are over the age of 50 or into their 60s or anything like that. The number one demographic that I now see for erectile dysfunction is men in their early 20s. And you might think, how is that even possible? Like, at that age, are you kidding me? Like, they're in college? Like, and it's because of the presence of pornography. And here's what's essentially happening to the brain. There's actually a really good video on YouTube if you want to dial in pornography addiction. There's a really great cartoon that sort of explains it. It's G-rated. But it explains how the wiring of the brain works. Brains rewire themselves, an aspect that we call neuroplasticity. Whenever you're re-engaging the brain over and over and over again by touching a pleasure center, you're having the brain rewire to remember where it got that pleasure from. So if you're getting your pleasure from pornography, then your brain doesn't know the difference between a real world woman and this screen, this phone, or whatever's going on. And in time, it learns to not associate sexual pleasure with the real world woman. So when it's put in a real world sexual environment, it doesn't know what to do. And so your body doesn't respond. But then when you're all alone and, you know, the bells and whistles are happening and the right ritual is happening and you're ready to watch your porn, now your body reacts perfectly. And so there's actually a huge problem right now in the world where we're seeing erectile dysfunction among people in their 20s.
I think kind of going along with the neuroplasticity piece, and I think this kind of ties all in the same thing. It's kind of like our brain is – it's more like – it's kind of like it's programmed more to identify new things than things that are constant, right? In the same sense that, you know, if I'm in a room and you spray an air freshener, if it's new, I'm going to catch on to it right away. If I'm in that room for a while, I don't notice it anymore because the brain has identified, okay, this isn't new, nothing's changing, it's not harmful, it's nothing we need to worry about. It chooses to ignore it.
Right.
I wonder if some of the same thing kind of starts happening with porn, where like when you are inundated with something, because I know that this happens a lot with substances. So if we're talking about cocaine and you are inundated with cocaine and it continues to happen on a regular basis, then the brain's kind of like, all right, this is no longer new information.
Yes.
And it just kind of becomes desensitized, or as we call it, tolerance.
Yes. And so to come back to this question, okay, if you're out there and you're like, hey, I've wondered this for my own relationship, what's the verdict on this? Here's the deal. See pornography like wine. If you're okay with wine in your relationship, but you have a threshold for when you think, you know, you need to readdress this, great. Apply that same standard to pornography. If it's causing a problem, then we have a problem with it. Is pornography inherently unhealthy? The sex therapist in me is going to say, no, that is probably a mythology. That comes from kind of puritanical philosophy. If it violates your religious sensibilities or your worldview or your personal morality, be true to yourself. I'm not going to ask you to, you know, inauthenticate what you actually believe. But is it inherently harmful all by itself? No, it's not a carcinogen. It doesn't inherently toxify a relationship or anything like that. Pornography can be used responsibly, just like wine can, and it can be used alone, just like wine can, and it can be used in a way that doesn't bother your mate, and in some ways can actually add new life and new blood to the relationship if used together or if used separately. And, you know, there's a lot of people that would say there's nothing wrong with an independent, grown-up person partaking in this kind of entertainment for their own personal use. Go for it, you know, and that's the thing I think in Las Vegas, we're probably in that kind of predisposition because we have adult stores all over the city, you know, where people are just encouraged to like go there. In other cities, that's very taboo. Like that's in the scariest side of town and it's like, you know, this dark, scary place. Over here, it's like, no, they're right next to like Toys R Us. Like it's not weird. So like we're a pretty sex positive city, but I would say that no, it's not inherently unhealthy. Masturbating is not inherently unhealthy. I would say those can be actually healthy behaviors, but also think about it in the context of your personal relationship and look for things like harm. If it's not causing any harm and it doesn't personally violate your moral views, I would say have no issue with it.
Yeah, and I mean, my feedback to the writer, you know, if you're okay with it and he's okay with it,
then it's okay.
Then it's probably okay. But I would encourage you to have a conversation with each other about what would it look like if it did become a problem. Set those parameters so that you each know what to look for. You know, if now you're doing this and then now it starts affecting our sex life, okay, now we've crossed a threshold. So be aware. Those are always good conversations to have ahead of time before you actually reach that point.
Great idea. Have a good picture of what healthy looks like. Have a good picture of what unhealthy looks like.
Very good. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about sex addiction. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
Welcome back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and we are talking about sex addiction. So, Nick, this whole episode took on a sexual nature. I did not realize it until we were sitting down.
No, I feel like I need to take a shower.
Yeah. Things are getting weird in here, man. Hey, hands on top of the table, Nick. All right, here we go. Next question. Here we go. My girlfriend confessed to being a sex addict. What do I do now? I live in a rural area, and one night I met Karen when I was biking around. I invited her over for dinner that night. We started dating. We fell in love. We both live in a super, super isolated area. She lives maybe 30 miles away from the nearest home. She spends all of her time by herself, and her job is entirely online. We decided to move into the city together, and we were excited. But then, today, she sat me down, and she said she needed to tell me something, which she had been keeping secret from me. She said she used to be a sex addict. Like, diagnosed and everything. She just told me all this stuff about how she started having sex at 12 years old and spent most of her teens and 20s pursuing sex. She said at 15 and 16, she would go to nightclubs and just sleep with older men every week. She had never truly been able to keep down a boyfriend because she couldn't resist sleeping with other men. She said I was the first boyfriend she has never cheated on, and all of her other boyfriends were 1 or 2 month flings, and I was the first one that even remotely mattered to her and was long term. I have to say I was shocked, but I also felt really sorry for her. She literally had to leave the city and live in the country just to escape her vice, and I've noticed she has an insatiable sex drive, but I never really connected the dots that it might be a problem for her. She said she effed up every single relationship she's ever had because of her sex addiction, including her friendships. She said that she loves me, but she doesn't know how she could possibly go back to the city and not fall into old habits. I didn't even know what to say. Was she saying that if we move back to the city, she's definitely going to cheat on me? I know that what she's saying is legit. She was crying when she told me. How am I supposed to react to this? I really, really love this girl. I don't know anything about sex addiction, though. I just told her that I would think about it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's real life.
Yeah, that's a big one. Reading this or listening to you read it, I guess my first piece of advice to the listener is, this may not be as scary as it sounds. I mean, because right away, he's saying I don't know anything about sex addiction, and you're hearing this from somebody who you really care about. Your mind automatically is going to go to, oh my God, this is over.
Right.
This is gonna end in tragedy and all that. But not necessarily. Right. I mean, it sounds like. Did he say how long they've been together? I didn't see that
like
anywhere.
Been together for quite a while.
I mean, they moved
serious.
in together.
They're about to, yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like this is this is maybe one of the longer relationships for her. So something is working. So let's not forget that. Yes. Something is going right. And I realize that they live in a rural area, but unless he's the only dude in that town.
Right. Yeah.
She must be using some kind of coping skills to deal with the addiction.
Yeah.
If she's not sleeping around with other people. So even if it's a rural area, if she really wanted to have sex with somebody else, she'll do it. As the saying goes, if you want it, you find a way. If you don't, you find an excuse. Like if this wasn't under control currently, it would already be a problem. My first thought. I think the idea of moving into the city might sound scary to you and probably sounds scary to her too, because it's another test.
Yes.
When we're dealing with addiction, there's all these little markers that are going to be tests. And there are things that in early recovery that you just can't do. But later on, after you've developed some healthy coping skills, you can work yourself up to a point where you can start doing some of those activities again. The good example I always like to use for any of our clients in our program is like going to a concert.
Right.
Okay, if they just got out of rehab, going to a rock concert is not probably the first thing you should do. Does that mean you can never go again? Of course not. It means that you have to work your skills up to that point where you can go again. So this is probably scary for her, going back into, from a rural area into an urban area. There's going to be more temptation. There's going to be more obstacles there. But this isn't a death sentence.
No. It's definitely not. And, so my first reaction to this, first off, that was great. I think that's exactly right. And the thing I want the audience to understand, when you hear this question, I think it's very normal for you as a listener to think, well, but is this real? And I want to start off with, did you see how Nick didn't even question that? Like, he immediately approached this like, well, I'll give you the same advice I would tell an alcoholic. I'll give you the same advice I tell you the family member of somebody who's recovering from heroin addiction, right? And so on my soapbox for a second, as a therapist, I want to just kind of say something definitively, clearly, and as loudly as I can to anybody who has ears. Sexual addiction is a real thing, okay? We're going to start with that. As with all addictions, it is also often a convenient excuse for consequences of your negative behavior. You don't get a pass from a judge because you kill a pedestrian, but Judge, Your Honor, I'm an alcoholic. I was drunk at the time. No. You're still going to face the consequences of your actions. And yes, you probably really are an alcoholic. And in the Me Too movement, we've seen guys like Harvey Weinstein, right? This big Hollywood producer. Mm-hmm. He was a sex addict. He was taking advantage of lots of people. He even raped people. And then, whenever he got called on the carpet about it, he said, whoa, everybody, okay. Listen, I'm a sex addict. I'm going to a rehab in Europe. And a lot of people took offense to that. They said, oh, isn't that convenient? Every celebrity is a sex addict. Tiger Woods is a sex addict, when they get caught cheating. As a therapist, I am always predisposed to believing the person, right? When a woman tells me I was raped, I tend to believe her or believe that the experience was traumatic and terrible for her and it felt a lot like rape. So I always take them at their word. And when a man or a woman tells me I'm a sex addict, I have this perpetual behavior, I am inclined to believe that, in part because I'm an addiction specialist and I realize that addiction is not just something you put into your body. It's not alcohol chemicals or heroin chemicals. There's also gambling addiction. And that's organic. That has nothing to do with something you put in your body.
Right.
Sex can do the exact same thing.
So that's the difference between what we call chemical addictions versus process addictions. Still work on the brain the same way. There's a little bit of a difference, but I think you're right. We've finally gotten to a point in society where chemical addiction seems to be a lot more accepted, and the research is coming in that supports it, and we understand so much more about this being a brain disease as opposed to just a fault in character or bad decision making. We're understanding so much more about it. Process addictions are another step and a half behind. They still don't have the legitimacy that chemical addiction.
I want to jump on that word legitimacy. So if you're a listener and you're wondering to yourself, is sex addiction a real thing? You got two addiction specialists saying, yes, it definitely is. But here's the deal. I'm also going to explain to you there is a huge debate that's occurring within our profession, within mental health and the science of it, regarding this issue. Earlier in this episode, we told you about something called the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5th edition. And this is like what we jokingly call it the Bible of mental health. But it essentially is a big book of labels and check marks next to those labels. If the person has the following 5 conditions, then you can use this word. And this word becomes a shorthand word to describe a set of symptoms so that we all know what we're talking about and we don't have to hand you an essay about every human, right? Even though every human's unique, this is shorthand. It's a faster way to do things. But here's the thing. When the 5th edition came out, which just happened recently, like in the last 10 years, the 5th edition came out as a big moment. It only happens like every 20, 25 years. We'd all been doing the 4th edition. And when the 5th was coming out, there was a huge debate about including process addictions. So the community was divided between two camps. And one camp was saying add gambling, okay, add gambling disorder. And they were also saying add sexual addiction, okay, call it what it is. But there was a real political divide because there's another camp within the mental health industry that says, no, if you call sex an addiction, you're going to pathologize sex. And so when somebody has a very high libido, you're going to call them a bad name and you're going to label them. And honestly, that group of people, they form around this organization called AASECT, which is AASECT. It's the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. I like AASECT, okay? They've done a lot to come at us and say, hey guys, can we all take a step back and see all sex as healthy sex? If it's consensual sex, it's healthy sex. Let's not pathologize BDSM. Let's not pathologize, role play. Let's not pathologize fetishes. And they've come a long way, and I really agree with a lot of their premises. Where we disagree is when they say, and there's no such thing as sex addiction. As an addiction specialist, I say, you know what? I don't get to define addiction. the patient does. And it goes back to what Nick said in the last segment. If there's a clinically significant pattern of distress because of this behavior and it's bothering the client and they come to me for help and they say, Jim, my sex drive is ruining my marriage. I'm doing inappropriate things at my job. I'm watching porn on my phone. I'm having a problem. Help me. Yeah, I want to diagnose that as sexual addiction. But here's the thing. Nick said legitimacy. The DSM 5th edition did not include sex addiction because the political fallout became too hot and because insurance companies were also saying, hey, if you include this, then I think we're sort of required to insure for it, right? Mm-hmm. We have to actually treat this, and this is going to get weird. Like, we're not sure what to do, and what happens if these guys have committed a sex felony, a sex crime, and sex has a very special place in the mental psyche of a population. But I'm here to tell you this. The research was done, and definitively, without question, sexual addiction is a thing. Anybody that tells you it's not has a bias. They're not following the data. And if you want to look up the data for yourself, if you're the kind of person that so hates yourself that you like to read psychological studies, you can pick up Kafka. So Kafka. He wrote an entire proposal. He called it hypersexual disorder, and it was supposed to be included in the DSM-5, and it went to the very last step of the inclusion process, and it was vetoed. And it was vetoed at the very end by a couple of members of one particular committee on the addictions panel that didn't feel comfortable with it being in there because sex was so taboo. But I actually am holding the paper. You can hear it in my mic, and I want to read you.
That could not be any other paper, by the way.
There's no other way. But I really want to read. I want to read from the study, and I'm sorry if I'm a little too passionate about this, but it bothers me. I specialize in sex addiction. This is one of the primary things I treat in my private practice, and I want the world to know it's real. But you might be out there and thinking, well, okay, I have a family member who, yeah, I've wondered if this is a real thing. Or for me, I've wondered if this is a real thing. What are the criteria? Let me tell you what the criteria are. First criteria, over a period of at least 6 months, recurrent and intense sexual fantasies, sexual urges, or sexual behaviors in association with at least 3 of the following 5 criteria. First one, a lot of time consumed by sexual fantasies, urges, or behaviors repetitively interferes with other important goals, activities, and obligations. Second criteria, repetitively engages in sexual fantasies, urges, and behaviors in response to bad mood states. 3, repetitively engages in sexual fantasies, urges, or behaviors in response to stress. 4, repetitive but unsuccessful efforts to control or significantly reduce sexual fantasies, urges, or behaviors. And 5, repetitively engaging in sexual behaviors while disregarding the risk for physical and emotional harm to self or others. There is clinically significant personal distress or impairment in their social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning associated with the frequency and intensity of these sexual fantasies, urges, and behaviors. I've actually read to you word for word the actual clinical criteria. We do not typically do that on this show. In this case, I have elected to do so, and I warned Nick that I was going to get on my soapbox because I want you, the listener, to understand the medical criteria for this problem has been written. It is encoded. We understand it. The data is in, and it is not included in popular medical pieces of literature like the DSM-5 for purely political reasons because we as a society don't know what to do if there is a proper way to address this and call this what it is. Because the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, who are isolated for proper scrutiny, and the Tiger Woods of the world, who are isolated for proper scrutiny, now have an excuse. And that befuddles us, and it makes it hard for us to understand what to do about it.
Sure. I mean, of course, there are going to be people who abuse the system.
Yes.
But there are people who abuse the system for everything else.
Yes, gamblers do that. I'm a gambling addict. Okay, but you're also going to jail. Okay, good.
Right. Well, I mean, but I mean, even if they use that as a way out, even if they don't actually meet criteria, but they say that they do, so that they can, not hold themselves accountable or not be held accountable to the behavior. But yeah, the point is, number one, you're still held accountable regardless. Right. But then also number 2 is that we can't not treat something because some people abuse it.
Yes. Yes.
We still have to be, so if I've got a client who comes in and they tell me that, this is a problem, this is an addiction they have, as a therapist, I have to take their side. I have to treat that person. I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't know that they're lying.
Yeah. And, to the writer, here's my advice to you, buddy. First, I hope that you hear in me a supportive...
Jim's down from the soapbox.
Jim has stepped down from my soapbox. I'm back to the listener. Everybody take a deep breath. Jim's okay. Jim's going to be all right. So to the writer, you believe your girl, and I applaud that. You should. And I'm here to tell you that's a real thing. And the criteria I just listed basically come down to 3 or 4 points. Has this thing become a problem in your life and it causes harm? Has this thing been something you've tried to stop doing and you haven't been successful in doing it, right? Those are like the big things that we're usually looking for. And is it something that's happening over time? It doesn't count if it's just a bad weekend. We kind of need to see it over 6 months. So, and it's not better explained by like drugs. Those are the criteria for addiction pretty much everywhere, whether we're talking about gambling or sex. So I'm explaining to you that it's a real thing. But your question is, what should I do about it? Couple of things. I want you to reconsider the move to the city. And here's why. If a person has this disease and they have found a successful way to mitigate its effects by running away, usually Nick and I will say you're not going to geographically divorce from your drug. But it's also true that you could move to a dry county and make it a lot harder for you to get drunk, right? And so that could be part of your success strategy. And if it's working, I don't like to mess with it. However, it doesn't sound like she's doing a lot of recovery. It sounds like she's just tried to separate from it, and we call that like a dry drunk. She hasn't addressed the root problem, but she's sober for right now. She's sexually sober. A couple of resources I want to throw your way. The first is if you'd like to know more about this disease, I recommend picking up Out of the Shadows by Dr. Patrick Carnes. It's kind of the definitive work on this issue. It's very brief. It gets to the point. Secondly, I would encourage her to look up Sex Addicts Anonymous. So if you're out there today and you're like, oh, I've heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay. Did you know there's also Narcotics Anonymous? All right, maybe you did. Did you know there's Gamblers Anonymous? And did you know that there's Sex Addicts Anonymous, which is the 4th largest tradition when it comes to this? There's also Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, SLAA. And SLAA tends to be something a lot more women gravitate toward. They feel a lot more comfortable with that fellowship. But I strongly encourage you to look into Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. Buy her the books. Buy her the white book for Sex Love Addicts Anonymous. Buy her the green book for Sex Addicts Anonymous. Let her read that. Let her start learning about the fellowship. And then for yourself, I recommend a manual by Joan Gold, which is called like the Manual for Partners of Sex Addicts or Those Addicted to Sex. And it's a really great handbook that educates you and gives you strategies and you ideas for how you can cope with this as well and be a strong supporter. But if you are in love with somebody who has an addiction that has caused them great harm in their life, you need to respect that as a disease. And you may have to adapt your lives to fit that person's illness. Now, that doesn't mean you can't pursue your dreams. It doesn't mean you guys can't move to the city, but it means you need to equip yourselves to do so. So if right now she's saying, I am not capable of staying sober in that different context, okay, take that for what it is, man. I encourage you to believe her. And then I encourage you to go ahead and to guide her towards some recovery resources, some therapy, some books, some writing. She has not yet addressed this disease. This is a disease that somebody can recover from, just like gambling addiction, just like alcoholism. The prognosis is good if they engage in treatment and if they follow through long term. If they don't, then they're a dry drunk, and it's a matter of time before they're put in a position to fail, and they will fail.
Yeah, good advice. But yeah, I definitely follow up with the therapy.
Yes, do that. And there's distance therapy, guys. Mm-hmm. You know, I do a lot of that. A lot of the patients I see now are via, platforms that are similar to Skype or by phone. A lot of therapists do that now. And so even if you're out in a rural area, there's no reason that you can't find somebody that's licensed in your state and see them as a provider. I think that's a really great move.
Yeah, thanks for writing in.
That's all the time we've got for this week's session. Thank you to those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can find us at Facebook, facebook.com/podtherapy, or on Twitter @podtherapyguys.
Do you want to add your own advice to today's questions? Post your thoughts at podtherapy.net and join the conversation. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm Salt Pork.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.